Hi, I'm Jimmy Illuria here at 3A Automotive and Diesel Repair. We get a lot of questions about engine overheating and performance issues. So today I'm going to answer some of the most common ones to help you extend the life and reliability of your car. What causes an engine to overheat? Well, typically what causes an engine to overheat is something in the cooling system isn't working properly, or you've lost the engine coolant, otherwise known as antifreeze. If there's a leak and the antifreeze goes out of the engine or out of the radiator, that does not give the engine any way to cool off. Just air alone is not enough to actually cool the modern engine. Back in the day, you would have certain vehicles that were air cooled, like your old Volkswagen motors. They didn't have any sort of coolant inside of them. But the modern vehicle has to have engine coolant because that engine coolant can absorb a lot more heat than even just water. So if we're low on engine coolant, that will cause the car to overheat. Now, the other thing that can cause it to overheat is when you have a situation where the fans aren't working properly. A lot of vehicles today have electrical fans, and some of them have multiple fans. You have one fan that's on all the time, and maybe you have another fan that comes on when it's extremely hot or when you're running your air conditioning and there needs to be more air being pushed through the system. So those are the two most common situations that will cause a vehicle to overheat. What should I do if my temperature gauge starts rising? If your temperature gauge starts rising, the first thing that you want to do is you want to get off of a main highway or a main street. This is a problem because as soon as that temperature gauge starts climbing, and if it doesn't stop and it goes into the red, you could permanently damage your engine. So if it's starting to go up, you need to make sure you need to get someplace where you can shut the vehicle off and get it towed to a repair shop. Why does my car overheat in traffic but not on the highway? That's a really good question. Your car is going to overheat in traffic versus being on the highway typically when you have an airflow situation. That may mean that the fans in the vehicle are not pulling enough air through the radiator and cooling off that engine coolant and cooling off the engine. So for example, if one of the fans goes out on your vehicle and you have the air conditioning running and there's not enough air being sucked through that radiator from the fans, it could overheat. But in that same situation, if you were driving on the freeway doing 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, there would be plenty of air going through that radiator. Now, if you had a fan problem, what would happen is as soon as you got off the highway, or if you got into traffic on the highway where not as much air was going through the radiator from the force of the speed, the car's going to overheat. Can low coolant cause engine damage? Low coolant can cause engine damage mostly because it's not cooling off the engine. And if we overheat the engine, you can cause all kinds of damage to the engine. There's a certain amount of coolant that needs to be in every specific vehicle. Sometimes that's 2, 3, 4 gallons. Sometimes it's even more than that. Depending on how big the engine is and what its tolerance for the heat is, you can cause major damage by having too little coolant in the system. So low coolant is a sign that there was a leak someplace. It was leaking out on the ground and you didn't see it, or there's a leak internally in the engine and it's being burned off inside the engine, and that's a whole nother set of problems. What happens if I keep driving an overheating car? If you keep driving an overheating car, you are going to cause catastrophic damage. It is very rare that when somebody keeps driving an overheating car too long that it doesn't do major damage, either having to have the whole top of the engine replaced or the entire engine. So if your vehicle is overheating, you need to pull over, get into safety, of course, first, and then get that car someplace where you can shut it off and get it towed. How do I know if overheating damaged my engine? If you've damaged your engine and you've overheated it, one of the things that a repair shop will do before they repair the vehicle is they're going to actually do some sort of a test that checks to make sure that there wasn't any damage done to the engine. You won't really know if the vehicle is still running. Now, I have seen where vehicles were overheated so much, they did so much damage that the car won't even run anymore, it won't turn on at all. But if it's still running, then there's a certain type of test that your mechanic needs to do to see if you actually did internal damage to the vehicle. So it's called an engine block test is what they do. And only your mechanic can do that because you have to heat up the vehicle with the radiator cap off of the vehicle. It can be very dangerous for a consumer to do. but that's the only way you're going to know if you did any damage to your engine. Why does my engine lose performance when it runs hot? One of the main things that happens when your engine is running hot is that it loses its ability to properly fuel the vehicle. All the timing components can be put off. Without getting too technical about that, another thing that actually happens is in a modern vehicle is that the computer sees that the engine is hot, and so it will reduce performance to try and save the engine from basically destroying itself. The other reason is there's internal reasons in the engine. When something gets too hot, maybe the fuel is vaporizing, meaning it's so hot that the fuel is turning into a gas before it gets inside the engine. When your engine's hot, it's not going to perform right because of mechanical reasons, meaning it's too hot, or it's because it's smart enough to know that it actually needs to tune things down, and you're going to see performance drop because it's just trying to make things run well enough to get you out of trouble so that you can stop running the vehicle and get the heat problem fixed. What smells or signs indicate overheating? Well, the smells that you're going to find when you're overheating are a sweet smell. Engine coolant is sweet, and a lot of times when the coolant is leaving the vehicle someplace, it doesn't even have to be a lot of it. It's leaking someplace, maybe not even so much that you even see any on the ground, but you will smell it, and it's a very sweet smell, okay? Now, the other thing is you need to look for is, what do you see? If you see anything that is related to engine coolant, that could be green, it could be orange, red, blue, typically are the colors of engine coolant, and it's more of, it is a little bit oily, but not oil. It's more water-like than oil. If you see any of that on the ground, that's an indication that you might be overheating. Another sign is that possibly your air conditioning isn't working properly. Those two systems actually do in some ways work together with some similar component parts, and if the air conditioning is not working properly, there could be a sign that you're actually overheating, and that's why the air conditioning isn't working. Can overheating lead to a blown head gasket? A blown head gasket typically happens because the engine's overheated, majorly overheated. Now, some engines, it doesn't take a lot of overheating for very long to blow the head gasket. What that is it is a gasket between the upper part of the engine and the lower part of the engine. And when it's overheated, there's pressure that actually blows that gasket out. The gaskets are typically less strong than the engine parts. So it'll blow a hole in that area, and that'll start leaking, or it'll leak into the engine, and your engine, it may not leak outside of the engine, but the coolant will go inside the engine while it's running, and sometimes you can even see steam coming out of the tailpipe because of a blown head gasket. How can engine overheating be prevented? Once the engine loses coolant through some sort of a leak, or it starts overheating because there's an air problem, not enough air is going through the radiator, not enough air is hitting the engine, there's nothing really you're going to do to stop that. So preventative maintenance is the number one way to avoid having an engine that overheats. Keep that stuff in check and keep it maintained, and you won't typically have overheating issues. Another one is actually changing out the coolant at the proper mileage. Now, every vehicle is a little bit different, but typically it's about every 30,000 miles, you're going to change your engine coolant and make sure that coolant doesn't get all gelled up and gummed up, so that it's flowing properly inside of the engine. How often should the cooling system be checked? The cooling system really should be checked at least a couple times a year. We do a full cooling system check when the car comes in for an oil change or when we do any service. We're looking over coolant levels, we're looking at the conditions of the rubber hoses, we're looking for any sort of signs of leakage around the radiator and the water pump that pumps the engine coolant inside the engine. So we're looking those things over. Typically you want to have that looked at least 2 times a year, and definitely before you go on any long road trips, have your engine cooling system checked out by a professional. When should overheating issues be inspected by a professional? I believe overheating issues should be inspected by a professional anytime there is one. If you have an overheating vehicle, number one, get yourself off of a main highway or a main road into a parking lot where it's safe, number one. Number two, you never want to take the cap off of your radiator or the cap off of your overflow bottle and your engine coolant. These things are very hot, and that engine coolant can harm you badly. Don't touch it. Have it towed to a professional and have them check it out. I hope this video has helped answer some of your questions about engine overheating and performance issues. If you'd like to schedule an inspection, give us a call here at 3A Automotive at 602-997-7978, or just stop by the shop and we'd be happy to take a visual look at your car right away. We're here to help you keep your vehicles reliable, safe, and valuable for the long road ahead. Thank you.